Thinking about illegal wildlife trade as a wildlife crime might produce policies that actually don't effectively tackle the illegal wildlife trade in the longer term.
In the context of the poaching crisis of rhinos, Vietnam has been put under high pressures from national governments and conservation NGOs to take stronger actions and measures to crack down on illegal wildlife trade. Under the new law, convicted criminals can face up to 15 years in prison and can get fines up to $600,000. This new law brings delight to many stakeholders. Dealing with illegal wildlife trade and other wildlife issues is still the area occupied by the government and conservation NGOs in Vietnam. These issues are still lack of societal participation at the wider levels, and they are disconnected from the local grassroots environmental movements.
If you call illegal wildlife trade a wildlife crime, what that prompts is a response that's anchored in security and crime. In debates about the illegal wildlife trade, there's an assumption often that it's carried out by organised crime networks who are very well organised, well resourced and have a global reach. But actually, when we look into the illegal wildlife trade, we can see that actually in lots of cases it's very disorganised and ad hoc. Sometimes when we talk about wildlife crime or people who are involved in illegal wildlife trade, they're breaching the regulations of national governments, but those regulations were actually put in place during the colonial period and they haven't been changed since. So we need to really look at what we mean when we say poaching is a wildlife crime, because for some communities they see it as part of their cultural heritage, or they see themselves as having a right to access that wildlife, or in some cases they have no other option but to hunt for wild meat. So we need to think about whether there's a colonial history to definitions of what constitutes an illegal behaviour, and sometimes that's missed in debates about the illegal wildlife trade as well. CITES itself governs two aspects. So there is a legal trade in wildlife and there is a legal sustainable trade in wildlife, but there is also a legal unsustainable trade in wildlife, but there's also an illegal trade in wildlife, and CITES holds a database. So member states report how many seizures of illegally traded goods they have within their own country borders, and that's one of the ways that we know the kind of size dynamics of the illegal wildlife trade. We know whether wildlife crime is changing, we know whether different species are being targeted or not, and it gives us a sense of where wildlife products are coming from and where they end up or where they're consumed.
Vietnam joined the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora in 1994. The reason I mention all of this is because I wanted to highlight that Vietnam is well connected with the global networks of wildlife trade, as well as with international conventions and treaties about this issue. So how Vietnam defines wildlife crime and response to it will be, to some extent, influenced by all these conventions and regulations. However, to unpack the concept of wildlife crime in the Vietnamese context, we need to situate this in the local and historical context of this country.